Hello, my third grade friends. Welcome back to our Read Aloud time. We are on the last chapter of our book, The Witches. I hope you have enjoyed this book as much as I love this book every year. So we learned in our last chapter that Grandmama and our character have made it home. Grandmama has redone the house so that our mouse is able to live in the house. And we also learned how his heart beats so fast you can't even hear the little individual beats in it. This chapter is going to finish up the book. It's called It's Off to Work We Go. Let's see what they're going to do. For supper that evening, my grandmother had a plain omelet and one slice of bread. I had a piece of that brown Norwegian goat's milk cheese known as goist, which I had loved even when I was a boy. We ate in front of the fire, my grandmother in her armchair and me on the table with my cheese on a small plate. Grandmama, I said, now that we have done away with the Grand High Witch, will all the other witches in the world gradually disappear? I'm quite sure they won't, she answered. I stopped chewing and stared at her. But they must, I cried. Surely they must. I'm afraid not, she said. But if she's not there any longer, how are they going to get all the money they need? And who's going to give them orders and jazz up their annual meetings and invent all their magic formulas for them? When a queen bee dies, there is always another queen in the hive ready to take her place, my grandmother said. It's the same with the witches. In the great headquarters where the Grand High Witch lives, there is another Grand High Witch waiting in the wings to take over should anything happen. Oh no, I cried. That means everything we did was for nothing. Have I become a mouse for nothing at all? We saved the children of England, she said. I don't call that nothing. I know, I cried, but that's not nearly good enough. I felt sure that all the witches of the world would slowly fade away after we had got rid of their leader. Now you tell me that everything's going to go on just as the same as before. Not exactly as before, my grandmother said. For instance, there are no longer any witches in England. That's quite a triumph, isn't it? But what about the rest of the world? I cried. What about America and France and Holland and Germany? And what about Norway? You must not think that I've been just sitting here doing nothing these last few days, she said. I've been giving a great deal of thought and time to that particular problem. I was looking up at her face when she said this, and all at once I noticed that a small little secret smile was beginning to spread slowly around her eyes and the corners of her mouth. Why are you smiling, Grandmama? I asked her. I have some rather interesting news for you, she said. What news? Shall I tell you right from the beginning? Yes, please. I like good news. She had finished her omelet and I had had enough of my cheese. She wiped her lips with a napkin and said, as soon as we arrived back in Norway, I picked up the telephone and made a call to England. Who? Who in England, Grandmama? To the chief of police in Bournemouth. My darling, I told him I was the chief of police for the whole of Norway and that I was interested in the peculiar happenings that had taken place recently in the Hotel Magnificent. Now hang on a sec, Grandmama, I said. There's no way an English policeman is going to believe that you are the head of the Norwegian police. I'm very good at imitating a man's voice, she said. Of course he believed me. The policeman in Bournemouth was honored to get a call from the chief of police for the whole of Norway. What did you ask him? I asked him for the name and address of the lady who had been living in room 454 in the Hotel Magnificent, the one who disappeared. You mean the Grand High Witch? I cried. Yes, my darling. And did he give it to you? Naturally, he gave it to me. One policeman will always help another policeman. By golly, you've got a nerve, Grandmama. I wanted her address, my grandmother said. But did he know her address? He did indeed. They had found her passport in her room, and her address was in it. It was also in the hotel register. Everyone who stays in a hotel has to put a name and address in the book. But surely the Grand High Witch wouldn't have put her real name and address in the hotel register, I said. Why ever not? My grandmother said. Nobody in the world had the faintest idea who she was, except the other witches. Wherever she went, people simply knew her as a nice lady. You, my darling, and you alone were the only non-witch ever to see her with that mask off. Even in her home district, in the village where she lived, people knew her as a kindly and very wealthy baroness who gave large sums of money to charity. I have even checked up on that. Here they are having their meal together. I was getting excited now. And that address you got, Grandmama, that must have been the secret headquarters of the Grand High Witch. It still is, my grandmother said, and that will be where the new Grand High Witch is certain to be living at this very moment, with her retinue of special assistant witches. Important rulers are always surrounded by a large retinue of assistants. Where is her headquarters, Grandmama? I cried. Tell me quick, where is it? It is a castle, my grandmother said. And the fascinating thing is that in that castle will be all the names and addresses of all the witches in the world. How else could a Grand High Witch run her business? How else could she summon the witches of the various countries to their annual meetings? Where is the castle, Grandmama? I cried impatiently. Which country? Tell me quick. Guess, she said. Norway? I asked. Right the first time, high up in the mountains above a small village. This was thrilling news. I did a little dance of excitement on the tabletop. My grandmother was getting pretty worked up herself, and now she had heaved herself out of her chair and began pacing up and down the room, thumping the carpet with her stick. So, we have work to do, you and I, she cried out. We have a great task ahead of us. Thank heavens you are a mouse. A mouse can go anywhere, and all I have to do is put you down somewhere near the Grand High Witch's castle, and you will very easily be able to get inside it and creep around looking and listening to your heart's content. There he is. All right, we are going to pause this today because this chapter is a lot longer. And when I see you tomorrow, we will finish up our story.